I figured it out. I figured out my problem with Steven Moffat's era of Doctor Who. So you're driving a car because you own a car, and it's a cute little blue car with a "my other car is a TARDIS" license plate. Okay, you're driving my car. Okay, I'm driving my car. And you have this good idea. You're gonna park on the top floor of the parking garage because for some reason that's the only place on campus you can park overnight without getting ticketed. Okay, it's not that good of an idea. Pretend it's a better idea. I didn't think this analogy all the way through. So you go to the top floor of the parking garage and you have an even better idea. You're gonna park at the end of a row so that, only one car is next to you and you're less likely to get hit by cars pulling out. So you go and you find this parking space and you park at the end of a row. You park really badly. Okay, I park really badly. You're all like diagonal in the space, and instead of fixing it, you get out of the car and maybe you realize that you parked badly and you're like, oh well, but I'm sure nobody will hit me, it'll be fine. Or maybe you don't realize you parked badly. Whatever. You have horrible parking execution. I call this theory the good idea, bad execution theory. And this is Steven Moffat's era of Doctor Who. Because I love Steven Moffat's stories. I love almost all of his stories. He just doesn't execute them very well. Series 5, I think, had one of the best story arcs of all of New Who. And actually, for the most part, it was executed well during Series 5 until, the end, when it was never fully explained who was blowing up the TARDIS, when they blew up the TARDIS, why they blew up the TARDIS. Okay, it was the silence, and okay, I guess you could assume that it was after the Doctor, killed all the silence in the beginning of season 6, but then you never, saw the silence being oh, we're gonna blow up the TARDIS, and you never found out how they did that. Bad execution. I think that the way Amy and Rory left the show could have worked really well if it had been at the end of season 6 instead of the middle of season 7, and if it had been a two-parter, and if it had been woven through the season a bit more. I think that Clara's whole storyline is really interesting and could have worked really well if Clara was a more fleshed out character and if the story arc had been given an entire season to be developed. And again, if maybe the last episode had been a two-parter, because that generally seems to work better with big stories like that. Good ideas, bad execution. And then, there's all of the social issues, but those have been talked to death. And as mentioned, they did exist in Russell T Davies' era, and they existed in Torchwood, and we can argue all day about which era had it worse, but that doesn't matter. I don't care. I don't know which era had it worse. But what I think is that Russell T Davies had better execution of his storylines. In many ways, I even think that Russell T Davies has the opposite problem of Steven Moffat, in which he kind of has bad ideas but good execution, because flying a planet across the universe and back into orbit without any major repercussions doesn't make any sense. Anyway, when I go back and I watch the first 4 series of Doctor Who, I find that I don't like the stories as much as I like the stories in, say, Series 5. But the first 4 seasons were just executed better, so they all work better as a whole. Their story arcs work better than the season 6 and season 7 story arcs. And Russell T Davies also has better characterization. So, most of my favorite episodes of Doctor Who were Moffat episodes, and Series 5 just might be my favorite series, but Martha is my favorite companion, and I think Series 1 might have the best execution of the whole show. But of course, that comes down to personal preferences too, because what makes something good or what makes something bad depends on the person viewing that thing. Everything is subjective. Series 7 of Doctor Who, I think we can all agree, had some major flaws. And I feel like most of those flaws stem from the fact that it was split into 2 parts. And each individual part had good ideas, but none of the ideas could be fleshed out fully because it was in 2 parts. And so it was just it was bad execution, it was this whole weird thing, and in the end it just didn't work well at all. I am interested to see what happens on the 50th anniversary, which is on Saturday. Oh my god. The prequel with 8 definitely gave me hope, but I always enter Doctor Who hopeful anyway. I always enter everything kind of hopeful. I agree that it's important to discuss and critique the things that we like. I like to enter things hopeful, and it does often annoy me when people completely condemn something before it's released, but I do agree that as new details surface about something, it's important to discuss those elements. Lately, I've been trying to keep out of big discussions on Tumblr because I find that for me, it's a lot easier for me to form definitive views by just kind of sitting back and watching everybody else discuss and reading everybody else's opinions, because then I get things from all sides and I can just think about it by myself, and I don't end up arguing with anyone. Tumblr has this kind of crowd mentality that unfortunately results in people like Steven Moffat being idolized and demonized by these 2 different groups of people, and that leaves very little room for discussion in the middle for everyone else. I don't personally know Steven Moffat, and I'm sure he's a nice person, but I think that his writing is problematic, and I think that over the years he's gotten a little bit of a big head, and he's not necessarily parking his car as well as he could be. But anyway, I also really want to talk about Sherlock. I love Sherlock. I really love Molly Hooper. But we're not going to talk about Molly. That's an entirely different thing because she's awesome. I think Sherlock is a really good idea, and that it has mostly good execution. And that might be because Steven Moffat isn't running the whole show. It might be because it's an entirely different format from Doctor Who. I don't know. Really, the problem that I end up having with Sherlock comes from the fans. And more than anything, from the people who so ardently ship John Locke that they have convinced themselves it's canon, and that it should be canon, and they have convinced the writers that any hint at this relationship that is never going to happen is a good thing for the queer community, when in fact it's queer baiting. I see in discussions on Tumblr a lot of the time, people saying how important it is to them to ship gay ships that aren't canon, because depictions of gay relationships are so rare on television, and I completely support that, and I think that's great. The problem that arises with John Locke is that when people become so insistent that John and Sherlock are in a romantic and sexual relationship, and in fact that Sherlock is not asexual, people begin erasing me. Do you know how many asexual characters are in mainstream media right now? None. At least none that use the word asexual. But the 3 that might exist on TV right now are Sheldon Cooper, the Doctor, and Sherlock Holmes. None of these characters have even come close to self-identifying themselves as asexual, but they are still the closest I have. I don't have a problem with people shipping John Locke. I have a problem with the way that John Locke is so often handled by people, including the writers, and I have a problem with the way that Sherlock's sexuality is handled by pretty much everyone. For me, John Locke is no longer combating homophobia, it is combating my entire existence. And I like River Song, and I like Rose Tyler, but I don't like the Doctor being in a sexual relationship. And it is clear to me that Steven Moffat does not know what the word asexual means. Disclaimer, I don't have any problems with sexual relationships, though I do have a problem with the fact that I felt the need to say that because I feel like otherwise I will receive backlash. What I feel like we need is to reach the point where we can all park on the top floor of the parking garage without running each other over. And what I really want is for Doctor Who to have a female writer, because I know that is a good idea. Laura, feel free to respond or talk about something else. This became about so much more than what it originally was about. But yeah, bye. Now I have to edit this. I talked for like 20 minutes. What I think we need is to reach the point where we can stop talking in the hallway when Shannon is making a video.